Hi everyone, and boy, wasn't that an invigorating speech this morning from Susan McCann. I was very excited to hear about your technology-enhanced active laboratories. Sounds really cool, and we're looking forward to hearing more about them as they develop. And today we're here to tell you about our own journey on technology-enhanced active learning, technology-enhanced active laboratories. I'll tell you a little bit about where our journey began. It began actually in 2010. In 2010, we had people from the library, from the Office of the Registrar, from the Robert Gillespie Academic Skills Center. We had faculty members. We had people from facilities traveling around the US and Canada to take a look at active learning classrooms to see how they were put together, how people were teaching in them, and to experience how the students were actually learning in them. It was actually very exciting and interesting. And when the team came back from those meetings, they looked at, well, how are we going to do this at UTM? Because, of course, every university, every campus is quite different. How are we going to do it at our lovely campus? So we looked at, 2 pilot active learning spaces. And those 2 spaces, they actually started back in, having faculty back in winter 2015 semester. And they have been in constant use since that time. And over the past 2 years, we have had 4,240 students go through those rooms. We've had 58 faculty teach in those spaces, and 35 of those are 35 unique instructors. We've had over 40 TAs teach in those spaces. So it's been quite an experience, and we're here to share our experiences with you today. One thing I did want to mention in terms of active learning and the whole active learning process is, as Susan has mentioned, it is a change in the paradigm of teaching. It is just kind of, for some, a paradigm shift. For others, it's just moving a little bit, trying things a little bit differently. So what does it actually mean? And if this were an active learning classroom space, I would actually be engaging with you quite differently. But as you can see, hey, this is a transmission model. So, hey, I'll just tell you what active learning is. No, actually, I want anybody, active learning. What is active learning? Anybody from the audience? Okay, yes. That tells you something about the space, doesn't it? How do you want to interact with your students? Do you want to talk with them? Do you want them to reflect? Do you want to actively engage them? Do you want to challenge them? Well, maybe you do. So we're going to share with you a little bit first about the spaces, and I'm going to introduce Kenneth Barry, who is our Instructional Technology Support Specialist, and Seya Silva Samararatne, who is our Classroom Technology Specialist.
I'll just stand closer to the mic. Thank you, Simone. So we have 2 active learning classrooms, and they're right across from each other of the corridor. In one classroom, 1154, we have TV monitors, overhead cameras, and 10 round tables. So these are pods that students can connect their laptop or their mobile devices to HDMI, VGA, and they can also connect wirelessly using Crestron. So each of the rooms, they have these pods as well. The next room, 1151, has overhead projectors, actually projectors and digital pens. So that's one of the main differences between the rooms. One has the projectors, these Epsons with the interactive projectors that we all get so excited to draw on. And the other one has TVs. And we purposely did that because it gives us some basis for comparison. Some instructors are, fortunate enough. I think, Christoph, you teach in both of them. So it's a good comparison also. We have for the ones with the projector, we have the talker board. I can never get that right. Talker whiteboards where they can also write with the non-permanent markers, as we found out that they should, right? And in the ones with the TVs, we have the monitors. Now, it's interesting because this morning in the keynote speaker, it says where the design influences the usage, and I found that very interesting. And when you step in the active learning classroom, it really influences the way you teach. We've seen instructors use it very innovatively. One has all calming streams running to have the student relax before the class. But Seya will talk a little more about how the instructors actually use the rooms.
Okay, so the technology in the classrooms support active learning, so the instructor can send their display to all the tables in the room, but more importantly, the students can plug into their table and share their display. So they're no longer crowding around one small laptop screen, and the instructor can pull their display and show it to the rest of the class. The instructor can also switch the displays with different tables, so that can facilitate peer review. So these are some of the key things. There's also overhead cameras so that you can write on a whiteboard on the table and then show that to everybody. So these are some key technologies. And I'm going to pass over to Diane to talk about her teaching in the ALC.
Okay, so I'm going to go through this really quickly, and the last part of my 5 minutes is the most important part, so that's when you need to pay attention. Last year, when I was working as a librarian at UTM, I was asked by an instructor to teach approaches for... Where's the clicker? Oh, thank you. I was asked to teach an approaches for finding academic research session to students in a second year course, CCT 208. It's a research methods course in the communications, culture, information, and technology program. And I was asked to lead this session to several sections of the course with about 40 students in each section. So this is a situation where I'm only seeing the students once during a course, so it was a session that would focus on the more mechanical aspects of information literacy, such as effective database search techniques. Typically, these sessions occur in the library's smart classroom, which is like a computer lab with projection screens. Because I prefer to take an active learning approach in my teaching that includes practice activities and group work, I asked if I could book one of the active learning classrooms, and maybe because I had an inside connection, I was successful. So that meant I got to teach the same session in both spaces, which was really interesting. So first to tell you what these are the two different spaces. So the top left one is the library smart classroom. So you can see computers are all in a row, and there are dividers in between them because this doubles as a workspace for students when we're not teaching in the class. But there are, what you can't see very well from this picture, it's hard to get that wide angle, especially when you're using an iPhone. There are projection screens all around for every orientation that people are sitting. And of course, you've seen the active learning classroom, and I was in that class with the projectors and 12 group tables. So what kinds of things did I do? I started off with some discussion questions through a classroom response system. I happen to use one called Socrative, and I actually did this right away. I introduced myself, said why I was there, and then right away went into questions, and they get to answer anonymously, which in my case, I'm like a guest speaker. I haven't built a rapport with them, so I thought that was important. And I did get a lot of participation. And it was basically to start them right off the bat thinking, and then I would explain things, so debrief, and a little bit of elaboration and demonstration on the screens. So then I had them do an exercise, which was performing a search in 2 different tools. Anyway, I'm going to skip to the next one because I'm running out of time, and this is the main exercise. So I had them, sorry, I'll try to look at it here, assign 3 different research questions to all the groups in the room. They had roles. One was a searcher doing the searching in the database, one was a note taker, and one was meant to be the spokesperson to report back. They had to break down the question, do the search, find some relevant articles, and identify why they were relevant, and then reporting back. So let me tell you how it played out in the 2 classes now. So this is the important part. What I found is in the computer lab classroom, even though I had a slide on screen when they came in to sit by people they were comfortable working with, they really didn't like gathering around a screen, one screen. And so the group participation was a little reduced, and I, walking around, couldn't easily see how the students were doing on the activity. In the active learning classroom, they were definitely participating. They're facing each other in nice round tables, and I could actually see what the students' process was. I could go up and see if they were using a search technique inappropriately that I had just shown because they just learned it, or I could prompt them to use a search technique that they didn't realize would enhance their search. So that was super useful to see their process, because this is process-oriented skill learning. And then the reporting back was more engaging and multimodal. As Seya mentioned, I had each group report back on parts of the activity and projected on the screen for everyone. So projected their answers. They all worked in a Google Doc. So projected their answers at each screen. So it was just a more engaged conversation and reporting back. So now I am going to hand it over to Sherry Fukuzawa.
Hi, I'm from the Department of Anthropology, and I teach a third-year course in skeletal biology in the active learning classroom. And the way the course works, it's a laboratory course. So we get a 50-minute lecture plus 2-hour lab. And when I taught it in a traditional classroom similar to this, I would do a 50-minute lecture where I would go through the parts of the anatomy, methods, and theory, and then the students would move into the laboratory for 2 hours, and every pair of student was assigned an adult human skeleton for them to use for the entire term. On the course evaluations, students said that they couldn't make the connection clearly between the lecture and the lab. They had problems transferring the theory to actually working on their skeletons. And they also had trouble kind of maintaining a continuity through the course. So we'd get a drop rate of about, we'd start off with 50 and we'd end up with about maybe 30, 35 tops at the end of the year. When we moved into the active learning classroom, I found that it was great because the learning outcomes for the course are that they have to learn the anatomy, but in different modalities. So they have to learn to identify the anatomy on x-rays, through soft tissue, through the muscle attachments, as well as their skeletons. And the technology allows them to examine the skeleton in different modalities at the same time. So in the active learning classroom, each pair of students is put into a group of 6. The overriding paradigm of the course is problem-based learning. So in the first lecture, we go over what problem-based learning is, and we tell them that through the course, they're going to have to address a practical scenario around their skeleton. So they're going to have to determine the age of it, or the sex, stature, body mass, and they're going to work in the group of 6 to go through these methods, like an investigation. And it kind of gives them the buy-in into the course. Then each week, we cover a different portion of the anatomy. We meet in the active learning classroom, and this is a good example of one of the activities. Is each week we do a different portion of the anatomy. So this week we're doing the hand. So I will bring a bag of bones with the hand bones in and put a bag at every table. So every 6 students has a bag of bones. Then I will take a set and put them underneath the overhead camera. It's great. You can zoom in, you can zoom out, you can change positions, you can point to things. And I try to explain the skeleton like a 3-dimensional puzzle. So they have the disarticulated bones, and they're going to slowly articulate them like a puzzle. And think of each articulation in terms of its muscle attachment, biomechanics, and movement. And I will slowly go through it underneath the camera. Then they're going through theirs at their table in 3D. Plus, I project on the screen my image, so they're following what I'm doing at the screen of every table. Plus, they have their lab manual that has everything kind of out in a schematic, and they work through it like a puzzle. I can switch and put somebody else's projection around for the entire class so we can see what they're doing wrong or right. Or they can focus, and sometimes, depending on the topic, a certain group will take over for the explanation of the puzzle, and they will start projecting theirs over everybody. And then to look at the different modalities, like identifying on an x-ray, I'll put up the x-ray without the answers showing there. And then they get out their digital pens, and they start marking up their screens with the digital whiteboard, which they love. So they start putting their labels on themselves, and then we'll work through the groups to come up with the answers to the problems. Then they move into the lab and they reinforce it. On the last iteration of the course, we had 47 students out of 50 successfully complete the third year course, and the student evaluations have increased significantly. The students like the personal relationship they have with me, and ironically, they like working with their peers. We intentionally set up the groups at the beginning of the course based on a survey of the students, so their experience in anatomy, how they feel about working in a group, if they've ever had any kind of experience working on projects, how they feel about collaborating, etc. And that's how we form the groups. So there's a little bit about group dynamics that I think Christoph is going to talk about in his biometrics course in the ALC.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm teaching Bio 361, which is a second or third stats course for biology students at UTM, and I'm lucky enough to actually use both of these rooms for the lectures and the tutorials. And what I thought I wanted to do briefly is just give you a bit of a sense of how we use, in a very simple way, these rooms to go from group work to the whole class. So in the first example, we asked students to come up with a list of steps that are required for multiple regression analysis. And basically, the students don't see these bullet points. That's sort of what I want to get at out of that lecture in that particular case. We get the students to work in those groups, 15 to 20 minutes. And then we basically go, so they use the glassboard or the digital pens to create their lists. And then at the end of those 15 to 20 minutes, we then go through each of those groups and ask them, how did you come up with the list? How did you decide on the order of those steps? And once we've discussed each group's contribution, we then sit down and as a class decide on what are the proper order of the proper amount of steps that we need to do to complete this type of statistical analysis. So they start out as a group, but then they bring together, in the end, we decide as a class what the appropriate steps are and what the orders are. In the second example, we use a data set that relates to the Donner Party story, so the story of settlers that moved from east to west, and we have actually survival data for males and females, and it's one of those classical studies where we try to figure out were females more likely to survive. And so they've already carried out a statistical analysis using a chi-square test, and in this particular case, we then asked them to carry out a randomization analysis, where they have to write a little code in R, and this is where we use the high-tech aspect of the rooms, if you will. So each group plugs in a computer, and as Seya mentioned, they then can project that laptop screen onto the wall, so the whole group can see what the code is, and then they work again in groups on that particular code. And again, after 15 to 20 minutes, I can project each group's code for everybody, for all the other groups, and we can go line by line through each of those codes. The groups can explain what they thought, how they decided certain ways, and we can then compare how the results turn out to be from each of those analyses. Were there any problems in any of those codes? So we can basically do group by group comparisons as to how they worked through those examples, through those codes. Just to the last 4 points that I wanted to make here, just a few things that I noticed. And the first point you've already heard from the previous people here, which is that students in these rooms, it's not like here when you ask a question and nobody wants to say anything. There is a buzz in the room. They're willing to engage. They're willing to engage with each other. And when we bring back contents to the class, I've never had any issues with having to wait for people to respond. There's an immediate willingness to engage with the material and with each other. So I would say that definitely learning is happening in those rooms. Also, the group work is amazing. It doesn't always work the way that you want, and there are various ways of forming groups, and that's a whole different kettle of fish. But what I did find is that in a lot of cases, these students that worked in these working groups in the rooms actually worked in those groups even after, and even on tasks that we didn't necessarily assign as a group. So they developed their own little learning communities in some instances. One thing that does have to change, aside from the way that you present information, not this frontal sort of style, is simply the flexibility. As in the case with the list of steps that I had in a couple of slides ago, of course, students are not going to bring necessarily the information in the way that you might think about it. They might have more detail, they might have less detail. So in the way that you prepare the lectures, you definitely have to be willing to be more flexible and expect some diversions and some sort of side angles that you may not have foreseen. Which also means that in some cases it might take more time to actually get through a particular set of information. For the whole course, I got through everything I wanted to, but how much time I could allocate to each of the sections actually changed considerably to how I used to teach the course in regular classrooms. So it's another consideration that is important to think about it. And with that, I'll pass it over to Diane to talk about the process.
So providing support for the use of these rooms is a really important component of their success. And our approach is guided by two sort of key goals. The first is integrated pedagogical and technological support. And the second is researching the rooms as teaching and learning spaces. And obviously, we have quite a big team. This is only a small portion, but those two goals could not possibly be achieved without our team, which includes the registrar's office, facilities, information and instructional technology service, the UTM library, the Robert Gillespie Academic Skills Center, and of course, the students, the TAs, and the instructors. So at the very beginning of the semester, or sorry, actually, before the beginning of the term, the planning piece is very important. So it's a matter of logistics, deciding who will be using the rooms and when, but also working with instructors to talk about the different components of their course and how those pieces will fit together within the space, and how the features of the room will support their pedagogical goals. Right before the beginning of the semester and for the first couple of weeks, we offer orientation sessions for new and returning instructors, where we allow instructors to come into the rooms and test out the different pieces of technology. We demo different activities that they might consider trying in their classes. And we also offer one-on-one consultations and in-class observations throughout the term. Very importantly, we also offer ongoing in-class support, which is provided by Seya, who's just going to come and say a few words about that. It's a really, really important component of the support structure.
Okay, so in my role as a classroom technologist with IITS, so my primary responsibility is to assist the two ALC classrooms. So in addition to the orientation, if the instructor has never used the ALCs before, I stay in the classes for about the first 3 lectures or until the instructor feels comfortable with the system. And even if it is an instructor who's already used the system, I normally check in on every single class that's scheduled in the rooms. They also have on-call support through an instant messenger system and through my cell number and through email. So there's various ways they can reach me if they need to. So that's some of the ways we support. And passing over to Diane.
And very quickly, we also collect quite a substantial amount of data on the way that the rooms are being used. We survey students, we do instructor interviews, and we use this data to inform improvements to the room and also improvements in terms of our support structure. So with that, I'd like to conclude and take any questions that you may have.
So, you know, some of our TAs in our classes also tend to use these rooms for their teaching and learning. However, they tend to be transient, like they graduate and move on. And so, kind of asking about your support network for that. Do you assist instructors? You do training students? And how does that work?
Yes, so we do assist instructors and TAs, and if it's possible, having the instructor and the TA together before the class begins is wonderful, because then they can talk about the nitty-gritty details of the course. And yes, we do also have the issue of TAs moving on. However, we do involve the TAs in the orientation refresher at the beginning of the semester. We offer that to the instructor and the TAs. So, and also we let them know that we're there to support them throughout the semester if they do have questions or they've run into issues. Yes?
Have you run into any examples where a typical class that was, or how the content that was being delivered didn't work in a TO room? Like the anatomy example is an excellent example of where this classroom would be very good. But if you run into problems where an instructor tried it and it kind of fell flat?
So the question is, have we run into any examples of where the content or there have been issues and it kind of fell flat? And yes, there have been several. There have been, yeah. And it's mainly because people sometimes walk in there believing that they can lecture. So sorry. You can't lecture, although you can lecture, but it's lecturing in a different way, right? It's now looking at maybe the attention span of your students, maybe 12 minutes, 15 minutes. And then how do I reinforce what I've just brought the class together to discuss or to, to share? How do I then reinforce what I've just, discussed with the students? So thinking about the instruction in a different way doesn't mean that you don't lecture, it just means you lecture differently. Yes?
The question sounds great that you have all these sort of supports and orientation for TAs and faculty in the space, sort of just prior to the term. But how about sort of ahead of time in terms of supporting faculty members to adjust their approach and, sort of months in advance? And,
yep.
And sort of related question in terms of how do you schedule courses in that and make those connections between interested instructors that are going to invest the time to adjust,
yep.
And also just the reality of the schedule.
So multiple questions in that question. Starting off with the question about, okay, so the first one was what? Remind me?
Essentially, how do you engage with instructors early enough that they can actually plan and adapt?
Right. So there's a variety of different ways that this has been viewed across the literature and by other teal groups. We're actually following the McGill model, which is to let the instructor decide. Because very often we have instructors who actually have been teaching for many years, and some have already been teaching in a very active way. So this transition is perhaps a more, one that is easier or, a little less traumatic maybe. But for other instructors who require additional help, assistance, we offer that well in advance. In fact, we encourage them 6 months to a year in advance. We do have instructors who do plan that far ahead, which is wonderful. And quite happy to work with them. And recognizing there are some instructors who we talked to at the end and said, oh, you know what, I really should have come to talk to you, but I didn't know that going in. And I know it now, and yeah, I'm going to talk to you next year before I go into the class. Yeah.
Just to mention, we also have instructional material that has somewhat of a timeline, 6 months before LC, 3 months to
We do. We have a preparing to teach. We have a couple of resources. So we were preparing to teach in an ALC. We have teaching in an ALC. It just gives you an outline of things you can do. There's some wonderful advantages to taking the Course Design Institute at CTSI in May, thinking about your courses well in advance to the September deadline. And there's other kinds of really great opportunities as well, like the Foundations of Teaching course here at St. George campus, and there's other resources. Yeah.
See other examples about sort of access to these spaces are coordinated as sort of being part of a program. And you mentioned community of practice and these kind of resources 6 months out or so. So is that kind of what's going on, where there is connections directly with instructors early on so that the scheduling can take place?
So we do have the Office of the Registrar on our team. They're a very key team member. When they hear that an instructor wants to do something in a specific way, they are actively looking for the right space. However, I do have to mention that we have active learning going on in our lecture halls, the large ones like this. We have, for example, an instructor who teaches a very large class. I believe it's 1,000 students. And he actually has the students break up into teams and he does activities with them. So it can be done in a class like this. However, as mentioned this morning, the spaces really do impact too. You have to modify what you're doing. Did I answer all your questions? Okay, yes. Okay. Carol?
I think it's a follow-up to Micah's question, and thank you very much. This is really great to hear a little bit further down the road, how you describe what it is that you actually did, so thank you. I guess I'm a little bit curious if you've got 2 rooms, and let's say they're oversubscribed. You've got a lot of people saying, I want to teach in these rooms. What are the criteria for how you select people to teach in the room? And in a way, are there any, I'm going to call them responsibilities or accountability, saying, we're going to select people, but here are the things that you need to do in agreeing to be accepted. So I'm sort of playing out the, what do you do if you've got a lot of interested people and you have to make selection?
So the key thing is that we have instructors who have, oh, sorry, I have to stop. But we have instructors who have made a commitment to teach a certain way in those classrooms, and so we've committed to them that they are going to be the first people to use those spaces because they've put the time to change the way that they teach, to change their syllabus, to think about their learning outcomes, how those align with the activities and the assessments. They've done that work beforehand. They have actually changed their courses. So we've made a commitment to those instructors who have done that work. And we also welcome new instructors who are interested in learning how to teach this way or who want to teach in these spaces. And we will have a new building, a new North B building that is going to have about 8 active learning classrooms. So I think we're going to have the space for it too.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.